will fill in the gaps when you're not supposed to. You will make those assumptions, some of which the state actually asked you to do in the closing. You will do that because you know what? It's natural. It is very natural, but not in a criminal courtroom. It is not only unnatural, it is inappropriate.
There's only two people on this earth who know what really happened, and one of them can't testify, and the other one lied.
Now, the jury had a day to think about the prosecution's closing, then heard the defense and the prosecution back to back yesterday. And then after getting their legal rule book, which is, I will admit, and I think everyone will admit, very confusing, they then took the case and it's now in their hands. And they're about to hit hour 5 in their deliberations. And we are here ready, of course, for the moment that we do get a verdict.
And one of the things when we wait is analyze. Take a look at what the potentials are from what we know about the universe of facts. So let's bring in criminal defense attorney Paige Pate and Florida State Attorney Stacey Onowitz. Stacey, it's good to have you here. Paige, thanks for being with us. You know what we're talking about. We were just listening to the clip of the prosecutor there where he was saying there are only two people who know what happened that night. One of them can't testify. The other one is a liar. Now, what was not in that statement is, and I have proved to you that we know what happened that night. Yeah. Stacey, let's start with that. The prosecutor here, to me, sounds a lot like a defense attorney, kind of spreading doubt about what Zimmerman said as opposed to making his own case. You tell me, how did it play?
Well, listen, there were brilliant points made on both sides, but as a prosecutor, you do want to stand up and you want to say, I have proven every element of the case to you beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. And you did not hear that. You heard a lot of play on emotion, which is also something that the prosecutor wants to do. They want to tug at the heartstrings. You have mothers on this panel. You have all women on this panel. That's not to say that that's the reason why you find a defendant guilty in a case. And in this way, you know, I think it was something the defense needed to do in their side. I think they knew the prosecutor was going to play on emotions. They knew the prosecutor was going to try to get these women into their grasp and say, it could have been your son. That's exactly what they were trying to say. And so I think the defense at some point could have hammered that emotion and sympathy, as in the jury instructions, cannot play a role in your deliberations. I think that's something that they missed on, that they really should have hammered on.
And Paige, just sticking kind of with the closing arguments, I mean, there were two very distinct approaches, not only in delivery, but really kind of the themes that they kept hitting on. I mean, you heard from the prosecutors in their closing arguments. They kept talking about focusing on your common sense. Does this sound okay if you're just relying on common sense? But when you hear from Mark O'Mara in the defense, he kept saying he focused on don't make assumptions, follow the evidence and what you know that has been presented to you. Do you think these are two effective strategies? Do you think one plays better than the other in general?
Well, in this case, I think the defense used the strategy they had to use, because in this case, their best argument is that the state has not met their burden of proof. So if I'm Mr. O'Mara, I'm going to bring out the jury charges. I'm going to bring out the chart that shows how much the state has to prove before you can find Mr. Zimmerman guilty. I'm going to take the approach that he took. Now, if I'm the prosecutor, I'm going to take the opposite approach. I'm basically going to say, look, ignore the law for a second and do what's right. Now, he didn't come out and say that, but that's what he's suggesting to this jury, that this is an important event. You are now asked to sit in judgment of Mr. Zimmerman, and you are the only people that can now speak for Trayvon Martin.
If you had to speculate, which is exactly what you have to do right now, you know the record. We don't know how the jurors are going to weigh it, but when you look at this, do you believe there is a better chance, if there is a conviction, of it being second-degree murder or manslaughter? Stacey?
Well, in my opinion, quite honestly, I think they're going to be hung. And I know that sounds a little odd. I just don't think they're going to be able to make a decision. If I had to go the route, of course, I would go the route of manslaughter. Murder, too, is a difficult case to prove. They have to basically say that he hated, he had ill will, he had spite, he profiled this person. So the bottom line is, in my opinion, I think the decision is going to be very difficult. If you're asking me if it's murder, too, or manslaughter, I would go with manslaughter.
All right, Paige, what do you think real quick?
No way murder, too, and I also don't think it'll be a hung jury. It's only a 6-person jury. They've been fairly close. They've been sequestered. I think it's going to be not guilty across the board.
You know, often, just to, both of you are very experienced and you both know this, the reason Stacey's saying something that is a little bit more ambitious is that usually when they can't come to a decision, they go not guilty because it speaks to not having enough to go on, having reasonable doubt. So to be hung, somebody's got to feel very convicted, excuse the pun, about their belief in the case.
And I also wonder the difference in impact on each juror, that there is 6, not 12. The kind of the pressure of kind of group think, if you will. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. You guys don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more coming up. We're going to focus in on George Zimmerman's injuries that played a very big part in the trial, and what they prove or don't prove, what they show, don't show. This is Verdict Watch for the Zimmerman trial, and we're going to be watching it closely.
Yeah, I think that,
CNN This Weekend. Verdict Watch in the Zimmerman trial. As the jury deliberates, we're live to bring you their decision as soon as it happens. Stay with the team that's been there from the start. Zimmerman on trial. CNN brings you the verdict live as soon as it happens.
You're looking right now at live pictures of the courthouse in Sanford, Florida. That's where the jury is trying to agree, trying to figure out what to do about this George Zimmerman trial and what to do with George Zimmerman's fate, really.
Welcome to our special coverage of the trial. We're officially on day 2 of Verdict Watch. I'm Chris Cuomo.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kate Baldwin. Thank you so much for starting your day with us and our special coverage. This trial has grabbed our attention and everyone's attention, really, every step of the way. And closing arguments were absolutely no different.
That's right. The defense yesterday was visual and a little bit provocative. At one point, defense attorney Mark O'Mara took a big piece of cement, carried it laboriously, throws it across the courtroom. Very dramatic, especially for jurors who aren't used to this kind of action. Why? Well, he's trying to make the point that cement could be a weapon. Take a listen.
That is not an unarmed teenager with nothing but Skittles trying to get home. This is undeniable. This is significant injury.
The defense is going to parade the photographs of the injuries. I don't think I need to show you the one photo that counts, do I? The ME photo. Who suffered the most serious injury of all?
We're joined once again by Pate and Stacey Honowitz. Once again, Paige, so let's start with you on this. Their closing arguments were fascinating in so many ways, but everyone is wondering whose argument was more effective. And I'm talking about whose argument was more effective for maybe the television viewing audience or other people that were sitting in the courtroom. Whose argument was more effective on the jurors? What do you think will be the lasting impact, that lasting piece of argument, evidence, the emotion, any of it that is going to come from these closing arguments that will have an impact on the jurors? Which do you think?
Well, that's a big question, and obviously it's an important question, but a lot of people don't recognize that lawyers usually do not expect to persuade jurors of their position in closing arguments. You hope by that time in the case that you already have a few jurors who support you. And what you're doing in closing arguments is you're giving your supporters good arguments to take back with them to the jury room to convince anyone who's on the other side. I think both sides laid out their respective arguments fairly well. I think the defense had to focus on the law, focus on the burden, and the state had to focus on emotion.
And Stacey, when you're watching that, it's interesting. It wasn't too present in the case in chief, in the main cases that were brought themselves about this cement. They talked about injuries, but not about cement. What did you think about this kind of last-ditch effort by the defense to say, by the way, when you go back into the room, this was a weapon. Trayvon Martin was trying to kill George Zimmerman, and here was his weapon. What do you think about that strategically?
Well, listen, I disagree with one thing. I think cases can be won or lost in closing argument, and I think it's because you need to hammer home the points that maybe they have forgotten during a lengthy trial. I think it was a nice piece of demonstrative evidence to show them the cement block. But I don't think it matched up, quite frankly, with the injuries that George Zimmerman suffered. And that's what the state was trying to argue. You can think this is a weapon. You can think he suffered severe injury. But when you wipe the blood away and when all is said and done, he didn't have to go to the hospital. He didn't have to have a CAT scan. He didn't choose to get stitches, any of those things. So do the injuries really match up with the weapon that the defense is trying to show you was causing serious bodily injury? And I think that's what the jurors have to go back and think about. Are the injuries significant? Then again, the jury instructions talk differently. It's what's in the mind of the defendant. Did he think he was suffering from serious bodily injury? So it really can go either way.
Well, one of the things on Stacey's point is that in the jury instructions, one of the things that's put into that rule book for jurors is that if you're being attacked with a weapon, it helps feed the analysis that you needed to protect your own life. So maybe that's why they're using the cement
argument.
But a question for these guys, something that didn't come up. You remember the dummy, the demonstrations they were doing? They both used it.
This trial, yeah.
Early on, the description of the injuries on Zimmerman's head was explained by someone grabbing his head. And there were doctors saying how you could see that someone had been grabbing his head, and that was the pro-defense approach on that. Then when they used the dummy, they both grabbed the shoulders of the dummy. And I wanted to bring that up to you guys, Paige and Stacey. During the demos, both lawyers grabbed the dummy by the shoulders and said, doing this. You're going to see it right now. Here's O'Mara. Watch where he grabs. He's by the neck and the shoulders, right? Bang, bang, bang. That was different than what was discussed. And a lot of ground fighters reached out to me during the trial saying, hey, I would never sit up straight on top of somebody like that. I would never grab him around the shoulders like that. I'd be grabbing his head. So the question to you two is,
I believe so.
Did you think it was at all interesting that there seemed to be a little bit of a difference here, a little bit of a difference in analysis from what was said at trial to what was then put forward in the closing?
Chris, I certainly agree with you. I think the demonstration was not entirely consistent with the evidence, but I think the point was just to use the drama of the dummy and to captivate the jury. I don't think they were paying attention to exactly where the lawyer's hands were. I think they were fascinated by the idea that they're watching what could have actually happened that evening.
And Stacey, do you think,
Yeah,
do you think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I agree with that. I mean, using that kind of aid, certainly jurors love a visual. You know, they're trying to imagine it in their head. If a lawyer gets down and has a dummy beneath them, they can kind of get a visual. But they have notes. They've been taking copious notes. That might be something that they're back there debating about. That's not the evidence we heard or we heard from the stand, yet the lawyer is doing something different. So all of these play a role in the deliberations.
All right. Paige, Stacey, thanks so much. We'll be back with you guys throughout the coming hours. Again, to remind everyone, we are waiting and watching as the jury deliberates.